I'm going to say that anyone who really understands music would never get involved if they knew the end game at the start. Right? I mean, I really laugh around, I guess, how simple music looks from the outside.
The whole purpose of this podcast is giving you insight into the lives of entrepreneurs in the music industry that's done something great. Con Raso from Tune Global has done that. He does not come from the music industry per se. He's come from the outside and made a big difference. Hope you like it. Hi everyone, and welcome back to Sound Connections podcast. Today we have an amazing guest. It is Con Raso from Australia. Thank you for being here, Con.
Hey, great to be here and be with you all today.
I heard about Tune Global through one of my music industry colleagues, and it's a really interesting company, and you're a really interesting entrepreneur. And we're going to talk about your journey as an entrepreneur today and the learnings from that. Before we dive into your journey, could you just tell me about your company? What do you do?
Yeah, so Tune Global provides a platform for the music industry, and it's a technology platform that really provides not only the music assets themselves that might be available. We have over 130 million music tracks on our system, the rights to how they might be used, but also context to that. Like, what would you suggest to someone to listen to? How would you use music in gaming? How could you use music in background music or in a traditional streaming service? In the back of seats in airlines. So we really cover a lot of different industries, but it all really does relate, I'm going to say, in the main to music. That's really about 90% of what we do. But, we do live video, podcasting, and a whole range of services. So it's exciting to sit with companies that are building something new and then find out how you can sort of help them power that to something that's successful.
Amazing. We'll get back to the company and really deep dive into your services and also the problems you're solving. But before we do that, I'm really curious about your story, because right before we started the actual recording, we talked about, the music industry. And one of your comments were that maybe you're more a technologist that works with music as sort of the thing. So you come from Australia and you had an upbringing in what industry?
Yeah, I guess it has. I mean, as far as me to explain that technologist thing and things like that, I mean, technology's always, I've always been extremely curious about technology. And I guess it is my passion to really think about problems from a technical viewpoint and how to solve those problems. And I think that's the roots of what I am. I think as far as music is concerned, I wouldn't say that I'm not about music. I did grow up in Australia through the maybe late 70s and 80s, and that was really a time of, English punk and that real emergence of that music in Australia. And I was definitely part of that scene and understanding and being passionate about that. But, from a perspective of technology, I really approached my first roles from a technology perspective, often in businesses that were starting to look at e-commerce and how to put those e-commerce elements together. And this was really, pre-2000. So it was quite challenging era for how you're going to do that at scale. And so I was involved in quite a number of different businesses through that stage that were dealing directly to consumers and building large-scale businesses in that frame. So when we started to, as we'll talk about in a moment, when we started to look at music, it was really similar to what I'd been doing in initially a non-music space, which then evolved into working with music in creating robotic CD duplication systems that we started to actually allow small-scale production that went into retail stores, how we started to look at that in terms of what would it mean for artists if they could now start to promote small-scale CD production themselves? Could they start to grow a revenue base? And from that process, which we'll talk about in a little while, it was obvious the CD business wasn't going to stay around, and we transitioned into something else. But I would say generally it's all been about how to deliver something to end consumers. Initially it was physical, then it became digital somewhat, and then became fully digital eventually.
So you sort of got an interest from music and sort of some of the problems that are inherently in music that maybe you could solve. Is that sort of where your venture happened?
I'm going to say that anyone who really understands music would never get involved if they knew the end game at the start. Right? I mean, you know, I really laugh around, I guess, how simple music looks from the outside, but how immensely complex it is, not only by the music itself and what it means to people, which is just, you know, incredibly diverse, but also how many people and stakeholders are involved in the music production side, you know, like, and so that process, I can't say that we certainly understood it. And from a perspective to understand the basics of licensing and what it meant for performers and writers and other aspects like that. And our journey was, or my journey was, I started to develop consciously relationships with a number of the major labels in Australia, and one specifically. And really started to build that relationship to understand what were the gaps in the market. By this stage, we'd already considered that the journey needed to be in digital music, but there was, and we'll talk about in a moment, there was a transition time that downloads were still a thing, and so it wasn't quite streaming yet. So that was part of our journey from downloads into streaming and that side as well.
And talking with these major labels, did you have like a clear idea, okay, this is some pain points that maybe I want to be tackled?
I think it was more opportunities, to be honest. The pain points was that here was a new emerging way of consuming music, right? And it may have been a little bit less so in the download space, although there was a real opportunity around how different non-traditional brands may want to be involved in that space and have their own shop fronts, for want of a better word, right? And be able to provide music to end users. But also certainly with, you know, what was starting to happen with mobile phones, and we could start to see applications. So in that really, really early stage, you know, we built a proof of concept on a BlackBerry device to show that music could stream on a BlackBerry. And that was something that people had rarely seen before. And so whereas we think about it today and go, oh yeah, it's just a music streaming application, there were so many challenges that had to be resolved every step along the way when you were really creating brand new ways of this technology working and working at scale. And so it was really about that. But, you know, especially, I guess, major music labels, generally speaking, I would say they're somewhat conservative, you know. Perhaps on the A&R side, there's a little bit more in terms of risk to take towards someone that you think is going to break. But in terms of where the industry's going, there's a little bit more conservative stature. And so it took a while to build those relationships. So it was a very conscious effort on my part and I'm from Melbourne, Australia. Most of the major music labels here are in Sydney. So, you know, it was a lot of trips to go to Sydney and really build those relationships and build a story around what we could do together, and start doing a few things together to build credibility, right, within that space.
I'm curious specifically, you know, in your storytelling, you know, you worked for one company and you did something and you sort of pivoted toward away from these physical things and now into, you know, the early days of Tune Global. What specifically happened? Did you just leave your job and started pursuing this venture?
I'm going to say some of the people, I ended up becoming the CEO of one of those early companies, and some of the people I was involved with at the time we decided together that there was a real opportunity here in music. So we, together, I guess I became the founder that had the physical part or involvement in the business, and then I had a few people that were willing to put in some money for the journey along the way as well. So we did that together. It was obvious that to me there was a really big opportunity within music and distributing digital music, but not within a context of Australia, but globally. So it was that real global aspect. Until that time, a lot of the things we had done had been mainly focused around maybe Australia and New Zealand markets. So yeah, it was that piece of taking a big pay cut, and going all in on that process. And I think founders clearly understand that. I think there's always this element where people who aren't founders don't quite get the sacrifices that you make along the way and the near-death experiences that you have on your journey, right, that really shape you. And I think you have to be happy to be able to sleep at night with risk.
Yeah. No, I can definitely recognize that. So what was your life situation when you decided to, okay, I'm going to go on my own and start this company? Did you have like a house, a car, a family? Like, what was your life situation?
I had all that. I had 3 kids. I married, and so no, I had the whole process in place, and so it was it. Yeah, I've never shied away from a risk, although I would say that doesn't. I don't think I'm in the crazy space with the risk. It's always like understanding what the payback is and the risk component is. But it was an opportunity that we felt was just huge, right?
Good.
Now, I would say we learned a lot along the way. It's like any entrepreneur or most entrepreneurs. If you knew your journey, would you have started at the start? Right? Maybe yes, maybe no. I would say from my perspective at the moment, the answer would certainly be yes, but we're in a good position at the moment, right? Yeah. If you asked me in the middle of it, perhaps I would have been a little bit more circumspect on that answer.
Yeah, because you mentioned at the start of this interview about like if you actually knew the full journey, maybe music would not be the space you would tackle. Let's go into that in a second, because that's really interesting, and obviously that's something I hear a lot. But you say we a lot, and when you read about you in Global, it says you as co-founder and CEO. So could you just go through, who did you start this with?
Yeah, no. Initially, it was mainly myself. There was a co-founder that was involved for a small time in the business as well. But I use the word we because I just believe it's always a team, right?
Yeah, okay.
So and in some cases, certainly my family and the sacrifices they have to make along the way when we think of we and we think of those decisions. I think, like all of us, or me in particular, I have to be conscious that I don't use the word I a lot through that process. But, great businesses are not built with individuals. An individual certainly leads the process, I believe. But it is the ideas that come out of building a culture where those ideas can come to the forefront. And, the normal stuff, there's no good or bad. Let's put them in the pot and understand and test which ones work. So I'm really big on, let's not just build it and they will come. Let's actually understand what we're doing here in the process.
Yeah. I think also, the aspect you just said about, the family also being part of we. I'm in the same situation now that you were back then. I have 3 kids and a wife, and it definitely is a journey you take together because there's a lot of sacrifice along the way.
Absolutely. I think, from certainly travel, economic sacrifices that you make, along the journey, you have to be good at communication, I think. And I think you have to be able to carve out time that is important for the family as well. I know we deal in a lot of different cultures and each culture has something different about it. and we've got to be really conscious of those cultures. I think to an extent, to a benefit from our side, Australia probably has a bit of a mix of both, working pretty hard, but also enjoying what you're doing and getting a bit of balance in that process. I'm not going to say it's really balanced, because I don't think a founder can be truly balanced. It's a really difficult thing to do, but you need to make an effort toward that.
Good. So specifically, what did you do? So you had this idea about Tune Global, and then what?
Yeah, great question. I mean, our journey is a little bit of an interesting one. So we had this idea of Tune Global. We started, we had some, there's, I'm going to say it's sales that occur sometimes. There's either sales or, clients that want to take a position somewhere. And some of those things don't end up working out the way you want them to at the end of the day. Clients run out of money sometimes, or an idea fails, or other elements like that. But I'm a really strong believer, and I look back and say everything that we did took us to a better place. It didn't look like it at the time. And so, one of the first things that we were involved with, we started to look at clients that required different services. And there was one idea that ultimately did not happen, and this person sort of left one of the music labels owed a fair bit of money. But together we were able to build something that was truly interesting and unique, and developed a really strong relationship with EMI at the time, when they were still an independent music label. And that was really powerful, because it started to allow us to ideate with them what are the opportunities in this particular market. Now, we needed additional money, right? So along that journey. And Australia is not an awesome place to raise dollars for the music industry, right? And so I'm going to say we probably did well over 100 presentations before we found a VC firm that had an interest, and we literally almost camped on their doorstep because they had an interest to be able to get enough seed capital. And it was a great opportunity, because we were able to put together that seed capital, and very quickly we actually built a business to profitability, right? Mm. Really early. But that profitability wasn't about growing a big business. It was about, great, we've now got a business that's profitable, but how do we take this further, right? And that was really the second part of our journey, which was into a more serious capital raising and understanding what it was going to take to grow a business at scale.
That first product or service you delivered, what was that? Was it a technological thing, or was it a consultancy service? What specifically did you do?
It was a technology thing. It was about how to deliver music within, it wasn't quite in a broad, I don't know if I can actually speak about the concept so much, because it's probably still theirs and they're probably still doing something with it. But generally it was around how to connect music to a physical product. So this was early on in the industry. And so we created the entire technical platform to be able to do that, and deliver the entire end-to-end technical platform. So we're able to demonstrate a great deal of capability. We would always regard ourselves as really strong technically as a team. And, we'd certainly build things that work, not things, that we just talk about and never exist type of deal.
And the VC money, was that coming in based on that first customer, or like where in the journey were they in the customer acquisition?
No, but, every time that you do a pitch, you do talk about what you've got in the pipeline. And I think some of these pipeline items don't always work out but as an entrepreneur, I think one of the things that you have to be able to do is pivot on your ideas. and still deliver to your investors, but it may not be on what you commenced the idea on, if you like, from a customer set. So I think there's been a lot of those instances where, there's been really strong hunger for what we do that has enabled various entities to want to be part of the journey. And, I guess that's part of the entrepreneurial journey of raising that next round and seeing where you need to go. From our position now, we haven't raised any money for a number of years in our journey. And today we're looking more at acquisitions, perhaps, rather than, other elements. So it's turned a lot full circle there. And in a lot of cases, I now sit on the other side of the fence, perhaps like yourself, and appraise ideas, and I'm tough on them, right? and as you have to be. You don't always understand that as an entrepreneur going out, that you really need to be really deep and expert on your subject and understand the fundamentals of what you're trying to do.
And now you being on the other side, in some regards, looking back at those 100 pitches you had, do you understand why people didn't understand you?
Yeah. I think part of it certainly is the music industry itself and the complexity of the music industry, and that perhaps we should have gone to a broader market than a very, challenging market such as Australia. But certainly from our pitches, absolutely. I think the more we've gone along our journey, the more we've understood to be very specific about the products it is that we're building and the problems that we're trying to solve. In some cases, I'm going to say those problems aren't always for the first putting profit right in front. In some cases, there's some things that we want to do to see a difference made in the industry. But obviously, a company has to be healthy to be able to deliver in those particular ways. So you have to wind that into the process. So no, I think most people can't clearly explain who their customers are, why their customers will spend money with them, and be able to have run some tests to show that that's actually real and true, right? Rather than just wishful thinking.
And if you compare your journey back then to, let's say, a current market for startups that's trying to communicate the worth of their problem solving, do you think that's the same case, that it's just really hard to understand where the profit is? Is it investors that doesn't understand, or like what's the general issue in your opinion with startups that are trying to do the same thing that you did?
Yeah, I think we ended up bringing on a second VC firm. There's two main ones within our cap table, and Will, who's our chairman as well on our board, he often talks about, like me, having a fairly ignorant view of music when they first joined Tune Global. And today I would certainly regard Will as very, very, very knowledgeable on the industry and understanding through the BS where the money is really going to be. I would say that generally speaking, if you're talking to VCs that understand music, they can work through the idea, right? I think your idea needs to be simply explained, because sometimes as founders, we can get lost in the detail rather than keeping it really simple to here's what the problem is that we're solving, right? But I do think they can work through the idea. I think the challenge is the journey that most founders go through to simplify their pitch and make it really clear in the problem they're solving, the assumptions they're making, and the backups to those assumptions to offer some validity to them, right? Rather than being pie in the sky. And I'll give you a specific example, right? In some cases, I think you've got to be careful that you don't talk about with your idea all the different non-specific companies that might require your services as new challenges that can be met, because those new challenges are going to take some time to monetize, right? Unless there's something that's really going to be, bang, I've got something at scale. And there certainly could be those. I think that's one of the mistakes as a founder. You really get passionate to go, oh, that industry could just explode. Yeah, it could just explode, but it's so small at the moment that to take that journey for it to explode is just going to take too long. Where is there that needs my services at the moment? And think about it perhaps in a different way to normal. The music industry, you could be looking at how to solve a myriad of data-related issues or core music issues. There's a whole lot of challenges that occur in the music industry that are not solved today. So, give it some real consideration and thought.
I'm interpreting what you're saying in my own way. So correct me if I'm wrong. What you're indirectly saying is you believe there's, generally speaking, a lot of weakness in the way that founders in the music industry present their ideas concisely and understand how to actually build a company around an existing problem.
Yes, and how they can back up their idea commercially rather than just being, here's how we could make money. Give me some evidence of what that is, right? Whether, I'm a bit of a proponent of using, whether it's lean methodology or fail fast or whatever else you might want to go through that process, but show me some tests that you've done for wow moments and understand those wow moments and what do users think at that level. And I'll give you a totally unrelated example. And I won't be specific here other than to say it was with a large rights holder. We were building something really unique. And we said, great, we now need to see if what we've built here that we've developed quite quickly really resonates in the market. And we took these executives out on the street and actually got them to start talking to people with a product in their hand, which was so foreign to them. It was so like, oh my goodness, you really go talk to people here. But we were able to take those ideas back and say, we didn't get a wow moment. What do we have to change here to get a wow moment? We looked at the idea, changed a few aspects from the feedback we got, went back out the day later, and suddenly the response was totally different. And so I want to at least understand, do people look at these and go, wow? Now, the second one is, will people pay for it, right? And just as important as the first, but give me some information that I can rely on there and not just your gut feel and then tell me that you have a sky-high valuation on a gut feel, right? I mean, you know what it's like. You're not going to accept those two items. So if you want a strong valuation, the more data that you've got that backs what you're doing, the stronger your valuation is going to be.
When we're talking about the music industry and sort of let's call it the weaknesses in the startup approach in the music industry, we also indirectly compared it to other industries. And do you believe that let's call it comparable weakness in the way that, most founders or the majority of founders in the music industry go about building these startups is because they come music first? Because one of the things you said before is like most people in startups, they come music first. Is that one of the reasons why this is an issue?
I think it can cloud your judgment, right? I think you have to be very specific about the problem that you're trying to solve. And we all here don't fall in love with your idea because you may need to pivot on your idea. And I think most people come in falling in love with their idea rather than being open to how should they pivot to get to what the market needs. And so I do think there's an element to that for sure. And I don't think that's really that different to any other industry, that the people who are within it are always going to have that view. But I think awareness of it, and I'm very big on attempting to be self-aware. I think that's a tough journey, right, to a degree. But if you can be self-aware and understand the judgments that you're making or the way that you're formulating whether an idea has merit or not, I think you can build better processes yourself as well. So, even in everything that we do technically, I'm always on the team to say, don't start with a bunch of assumptions here. Let's see where the data takes us through those assumptions. But yeah, I do think the other bit of it is, though, there is some underpinning that depends, I guess, where people came from in that journey. There's obviously a lot of fiscal responsibility that you need to put in place in building a business. Some people have those skills, or some people need to make sure they bring them in. And, you need a mixture of skills in a company. That's certainly one of the important ones as well.
We've just spent some time, learning from your well-earned wisdom about how to navigate as a startup company. I'm just going to turn a bit back to you guys raising money. So you raised money the first round with a VC. What did you spend that money on?
At that stage, we were actually quite cautious on spending the money because we had built a business that was profitable, and the VC needed to actually give us a bit of a shake and say, you need to spend it faster, right, than what we've given it to you. And I would say we were a little bit naive, and we could have put better processes in place. So we spent that money on testing different growth methods that we could use to grow our business bigger than what it was, right? But I think the mistake that if I had to do it again, I probably would have spent that money on higher quality employees right at the start and actually brought deeper skills into the company, which I think would have helped me further when we raised the next round, which was much more significant, right? And so I think to that end, it was useful. We grew the business. From a technology standpoint, there's probably to understand that at that stage, today we just think, let's deploy in the cloud. At that stage, we were building our own infrastructure in our own buildings, which had tremendous cost up front that you don't have to do as a startup these days. So it was a more challenging business in that particular way as well. I think it's easier to experiment today and, without burning a whole lot of money in those experiments.
So you grew the business and you did a few mistakes with, trying growth processes and strategies. And then you ended up raising one more round. What was the purpose of raising that round?
It was really to grow significantly. So we wanted to actually push out from Australia globally, right, in that process. I'm going to say we weren't truly, I think we're really clear on that today. It took a little while to understand that journey and what we needed to do in that space. And again, same challenge that we had with looking at multiple investors, the traditional VC funds, family offices, a whole range of different options. And then we did find a company that certainly has been a great relationship for us. So it's a VC company that we developed a really tight relationship with. They really bought into what we were doing, and we were very transparent with them along the journey, and were able to really work together. And still with me leading the business in all the traditional ways, but I guess, hopefully I've always been a good listener in that process and understood where there's been some weaknesses to do. Yeah. From a journey perspective, though, I guess one of the hiccups in the music industry in general, and for us specifically, was we built in Australia, we built, a good, profitable business in a small market, right? And at that stage, other services were starting to come into the country, like Spotify and I think at that stage Pandora, even though Pandora is not here any longer. And the major enterprises we were building services for started to look and say, do we really need to have our own service when we can just give people Spotify or give people something else? And I think that's typical when a larger company like that enters the market. We do believe that there's a real transition period for companies where they takes them about 2 years, but then they say, is this really about giving something away, or is this about building a relationship with a customer? But we had this process. So what we did, and we'd already then raised the money at this stage, we started to move out into Southeast Asia. And this was a real pivotal point for us that shaped us as a business, because in Indonesia, we developed a relationship with some of the major music rights holders in that country, and we jointly created a direct-to-consumer service. And we built that over a period with some really interesting examples that we can go a little bit deeper on, to about 4 million users, right? And so we got good scale, hard country to monetize in, right? Mm. But because we now were responsible for the end-to-end process of a successful music service, we now started to understand, what's it going to take to attract a customer? How much do I want to pay for a user, right? What's the lifetime value of the user? How am I going to keep them engaged? What am I missing from features perspective that can work and things like that? And I would say our DNA today is always trying to clearly understand what our clients are trying to achieve, and using the knowledge that we've built over time to say, here is the suite of products that we've made available, so you can actually do funnel-based marketing to your end users, so that you can understand how you can build a subscriber base and do that process if that is what you're trying to do. That was a service called Nada Kita at the time, which means our music in Bahasa, which is Indonesian. Ultimately we shuttered that service because you really need incredibly deep pockets when a country is effectively free subscription, so you're funding a lot of the processes. We learned that. This is one of the questions I mentioned before. At the end of the day, it cost a lot of money to attempt that. But if I look at it, I say we just learned so much through that process that it really shaped our journey going forward.
And that's one of the really interesting things when I look at your website. The amount of products and services you deliver are super complex and manifold, and that comes from those experiences you've been through. So Tune Global today, more specifically than when we started the podcast with, how do you deliver services to clients?
Yeah, I mean, we basically have three main products that we offer. One is what we call a content delivery service, and they're for clients that perhaps want to build their own API infrastructure, but they want a standardized way of getting music available from lots of different rights holders and understanding both publishing and master rights and everything else. And we can do that. We can do that quickly, easily, reliably. Our second service is a full suite of APIs. So if someone's trying to build a full-on streaming service, if they're trying to build live video concerts, if they're trying to build, for want of a better word, a Spotify compete in some way, they can use our full suite of APIs, and they go deep. They don't just provide information about music, but they provide information about the users from an anonymous perspective to understand, what can I deliver to you that makes sense to you, right? So we empower all those elements. The third one is a full turnkey solution. So we do apps, watches, TVs, end-to-end processes, and really broad. So we have customers in Germany that focus on the children's audiobook market. We have clients that just focus on gaming. Many telco clients from Kazakhstan through to Japan, Indonesia, Africa, Ghana, and obviously everything in between with US, UK. But I think certainly in some of those non-traditional places, we find ourselves quite strong in those areas. And part of that reason was that as we moved early into Southeast Asia, these were areas that were metadata poor. They didn't explain or have access to all the metadata that is important in creating music or suggesting music. So we had to build many of these things ourselves for those markets, and we're able to take those around the world. But no, so these days, a lot of clients in medical, and how do they use music in medical outcomes, health and fitness, and I think that's only getting broader. So what we've seen over the last few months, we've launched services that are much more around Web3 aspects. We allow people with various partners to be able to mint their royalties on chain and actually have that music flow in and actually get paid out in USDC, right, directly. So it's really understanding how do we actually help the industry adding, certainly in these fast evolving markets, how do we help the local artists monetize and actually be able to build up an income around their music, right? And becomes core often to what we do. Although, we have major label content, and in many of our services, it's only major label content that's available.
Obviously now you're quite a successful company, and you have a bunch of employees and a bunch of customers that are very impressive. If you didn't build this in the music industry, let's imagine you had the same amount of progress and success, but you didn't build in, a music-related field, do you believe the company would be bigger, more profitable?
That's a really interesting question. When you think about the music that we hold and the way we have to manage rights, and that we're managing over 2 billion sets of rights at any one time, there's an interesting question to say, could this be used really successfully in anything that you wanted to manage really complex rights for, right? And I think the answer to that would be yes. But gosh, it just wouldn't be as much fun, though, I've got to say, right? Because, I guess, we get a lot of engineers that work for us, and many of them come from banks or other industries that are a little bit dry. And it is fun to be involved in something that you tend to understand and be able to dissect and know in a different way. So I don't think that really answers your question, but there's so much complexity when you think of millions of users accessing millions of rights and the complex nature of that. I would probably say, Jacob, there's many other ways to use that infrastructure.
Now we've talked for a while, and you really strike me as a very, very passionate entrepreneur that loves what you do. And building a business is great, and now you're running and driving a successful business. What's the outcome you're going for? Are you looking for an exit?
That's a great question. I think any business that has VC as part of its process, that's the reason VC gets involved, right? It's not necessarily always the reason that founders get involved in the process, because founders like to see something grow. I would love to see what we do get bigger and bigger, and there's lots of different ways to do that, right? There's ways to do that by, working out ideas that work at an IPO level. There's ways to do it with strategic partnerships. There's ways to do it with buying more companies and creating a bigger entity that has more power in that market. We've certainly been looking for ourselves at companies that the companies we're always interested in are companies that have technology that provides strong user engagement, right? Because our clients at the end of the day, really, that's what they're passionate about. How do they connect more dwell time, more usage time in whatever they're doing for whatever purpose that they're doing. So I'd say the end game is still to be written in that way, but I think if an entrepreneur is going to take on VC funding, it's probably one of the questions that I'm sure the VC will tell you about, but you want to understand from the outset that obviously a VC gets in only for the reason to get out.
Sure. Yeah, that's true.
Yep.
We're sort of soon wrapping up the episode, and it's been extremely good. But if you were a young entrepreneur again in 2008, but you would be living in 2024,
okay,
what would you think would be one of the most interesting things tackling or grabbing the opportunity in the music industry?
I think the way that we consume music in the future will be really different. I think the emergence of more and more music and, moving through to what everyone says is going to be 450, 500 million tracks that are available are going to mean that there is a strong, in my opinion, emergence of many different services that people have access to. I think right now we think always in the term of an app. And you say, but will people download additional apps or subscribe to additional apps to do that? But we're starting to see the early stages of using different types of AI that build a layer between the applications that are perhaps running in the background and what the user is being presented in the foreground. So I think there's real opportunity to build a different way that people can access the music they love, but the sources of that music aren't coming from any one point. Those sources are effectively being, in the past Yahoo was one of the early aggregators of news websites, but AI puts something different on top of it. And it provides a different way that you can visualize, or perhaps not even have to visualize, maybe get it to an audio realm, that experience. So for me, I think there's a lot of discourse around AI at the moment, but most of it centers around how people are training models or generating generative music. But if we move away from that concept and say, how does it actually affect the way that I want to consume music? For me, that would be just a huge opportunity.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting, and it's actually the first time I've heard someone vocalize it the way that you do, and I try to stay kind of on top with these new ideas. So that's super interesting, and I'll delve in that myself. I think that's... Yeah. So as an entrepreneur specifically, as one of the last questions, if we were to use your example of that new paradigm, that new way of consuming music, would the opportunity be in building some sort of service that would feed that feed? Or would it be, creating the layer that could source some of that product into that feed? Like, what do you believe the actual practical application would be?
Yeah, I think rights holders and understanding how rights holders are part of this process, or if you're building something just for the independent market, is key in music. So, I think too many people come into music and they ignore that aspect and build something and then go, yeah, but no one's going to license this or make it available or do anything else. So you have to tackle those items first. And so you have to ensure that the people that you are working with or making their product available in this way are taken on that journey with you. Now, how you choose to do that is complex, right? And some people have greater availability of some of these people than others, right? So that can be a challenge in some cases. We didn't have great availability of these people. We had to put the hard work in building the relationships and understanding how we built those relationships in that process. But I would be looking more at that side. And then, yes, there's a technical process here, and there is models that have to be considered, but I'm not thinking of those models as models that are really, around music in there themselves. They're more around the usage behavior of people and how they work. So, and I think if we brainstormed around that particular topic, we'd have enough for another 2 hours. And but, I just don't, I say to our team and to people, listen, I can't think of a better time to live than right now. I mean, it's truly exciting. And I think you have to look at it in that way and say, what are the problems that we can solve here that, will have impact? And if I'm early startup, how do I do that so that I can at least get to stage one, which is to get some money in the company and get moving with what I'm trying to do.
Well, thank you for this talk. I think it's super inspiring, and I really hope the entrepreneurs and music industry professionals that listen to this episode will be inspired. I feel like I've learned a lot, and I do want to thank you for your time, and good luck with your ventures in the future.
Thanks, Jacob. Thanks for the time. It's been great sharing with everyone, and hopefully, hopefully someone's able to get something out of this and be able to move it on and build something truly inspiring for me. I always look for the next great idea, and I'll be looking out there for it as well.
Thank you, Con.
Thank you.
Great to have you on.